Great innovation stories make change possible. Each week on the Innovation Storytellers podcast, I invite innovation leaders to share how they overcame the obstacles to introduce breakthrough ideas to the world through the power of story. I'm featuring guests from Tesla, TD Ameritrade, Corning, Cisco, Bloomberg, and so many more. Listen in to learn how you can tell a more effective innovation story and change the future for the better.
Hey everyone, it's Susan Lindner, your host of Innovation Storytellers. I'm taking a little break here at the end of the year and wanted to revisit one of my favorite conversations that we had this year on the podcast with Mike Pilliod. Now, Mike is an outside the box thinker from the get-go, coming from places like, GE and Apple, working on everything from the iPad to the iPhone to the Apple Watch. But his real breakthrough, and I use that term tongue in cheek, it came from when he moved on to Tesla and had one of the most spectacular events happen in the course of his career. I don't want to ruin it for you, but imagine being responsible for all glass projects at Tesla. And just imagine the amount of glass in an automobile. Being responsible for that project, and then on a global stage in front of millions of people, watching Elon Musk and his number two take a steel snowball to what is said to be the world's most indestructible Cybertruck, and watching all of those dreams shatter. I don't want to give away too much about the conversation of the story that Mike and I had on the podcast, but what I do want to say is, or what I do want you to reflect on is, what would it be like to have an innovation culture in which you could literally fail on a global stage and walk into the office the next day and everyone just look at you and say, so what's next? Imagine if your culture was so resilient, so inward looking, so forward thinking, and so empathetic to the trials and tribulations of change and growth that your innovation team would welcome you back with open arms after watching something so heartbreaking happen. I want you to tune into the podcast so you find out exactly what I'm talking about. And you can certainly find the clips on YouTube that will detail, and you can watch it live. But tune into this conversation with Mike Pilliod, who is a veteran at a very young age of being involved in some of the most important innovations in our human history since you and I have been here, and how he talks about creating cultures that allow you to be resilient in the face of really tough and sometimes really public failures. I think this one is the greatest reminder coming into the new year of tough times and huge opportunities. Thank you so much for joining me this year on Innovation Storytellers. There are only going to be more amazing guests in the year to come. Thanks. I think today might be my most excited day ever on the show. For the last 20 years, I've been helping innovators and disruptors to tell their stories. 10 acquisitions, hundreds of innovative products, and countless hockey stick growth curves up and down, and new experiences and new categories along the way. I wanted to share how great innovations get to the market using stories to pave the way. And I'm so over the moon excited that I have Mike Pilliod here with us from Tesla, super innovator, glass specialist, someone who takes innovation and decides to break all the rules. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. We're here to talk about how innovation at one of the most cutting edge companies in the world gets done. And Mike, I'm so excited that you're here with us today. For those of you who don't know Mike, he is the director of Tesla Glass, and he is a dad and a husband and a lover of great products and advanced materials. His background is in ceramic engineering and glass science. And he says that he's been incredibly fortunate to be at places like GE and Apple and Tesla. But I would argue that those companies are very grateful to have him in their fold. He sees this ride around innovation and glass and these kind of applied materials as been an incredible ride. And he's looking forward to working with his team on all of the future challenges that are coming at him at Tesla, and the ability to launch new technologies, even more incredible, those opportunities that live on those horizons. So Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. And I understand this is your very first podcast interview solo. So we are super thrilled that you're doing it with us today at Innovation Storytellers.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Susan, for the warm welcome, and really appreciate looking forward today. Thanks for the introduction. And yeah, this is my first one, so I'm really excited to talk with you and talk innovation.
So you've worked for these little mom and pop shops like GE and Apple and Tesla, small
Right.
businesses just trying to find their way in the big, beautiful world of innovation. So give us a little bit of a walkthrough before we dive into some of the coolest innovations that you've worked on. How did you get to this point of choosing innovation as a path? Did you think about that when you were a student just studying around these, engineering and applied materials? Or tell us a little bit about your foray into innovation.
Yeah, like you mentioned, my background's in ceramic engineering and glass science. I started my career at GE at the research center and then went on to their plastics division. At GE, it was a remarkable way to get trained to be how to operate in a big corporation. They had an amazing amount of training, but I wouldn't say that engineering was the path forward for a company like GE when I was there. You were kind of trained to be a manager or to really go up a different route to excel at a corporation. But I got a great training there for how to behave in a corporate environment.
In the cage, or does that mean that they gave you the frameworks to actually be successful?
They gave you the framework, and I think it's probably about the time and place at when people join companies. I joined GE when it was sort of at the pinnacle of sort of corporate structure, and it was an incredible amount of education that I got there. Maybe even afterwards, that sort of engineering and product design drove a company like GE. At probably at one point that was the case. GE was a great product company. And when I joined Apple in 2008, it was sort of a refreshing, wide open, childish taking a look at creatives and working around an engineering product driven company. And that changed my entire view of what it means to sort of excel at a corporation, engineering and product driven companies. And I just fell in love with product design and industrial design, as well as being a part of the entire team that creates great products. So I would say it's and I would hope, and it also maybe got me a little bit into how do you really look for learning environments inside a corporation and continue to get smarter, if you will, even after college. And that absolutely happened here on the West Coast when I joined Apple and even at Tesla, where you're continuing to learn, trying new things. So I would attribute my riding this sort of innovation glass wave started probably when I was in 2008 when I joined Apple and got an amazing education around how does a corporation do products and really excel at them. For me, I define it based on relevant innovation, meaning I like to look and point at things that are in real life that are launched into products. And that's what drives me. It's working for corporations to scale up mass production. And that's just my personal view of innovation. It could be innovative to do research or things. I really enjoy manufacturing and launching products, making an influence on large scale product developments.
Let's take the experience at Apple. There are a couple of just amazing things that you said in there. And I think it's such a wise observation, especially for some of our listeners who are on the younger end of the spectrum, who really are beginning their careers in innovation, to seek out those environments where learning is part and parcel of the development of a professional, and say, I need to be in an environment that's constantly challenging me to learn more every single day. Is that what you found? And what product were you working on the time when that was kind of becoming apparent to you? Or was it just in the air at Apple and everyone was expected to keep on learning?
Yeah, there were some great mentors and leaders at Apple who had a thirst for learning, especially in the industrial design team that were there, of taking a look at a new product, but also being open to listen to gathering information and listening, as well as the process to down select the right materials at the right time during a product development side of things. So I would say in hindsight, when you look back on it, it looks innovative. When you're inside of it, it's work and it's a lot of it's a process. Since we're doing development and I guess most people who are listening are innovators, but when you're doing development, you're doing something that's never been done before. So the approach and attitude and the process is rigorous. What you can't do is sort of pick the answer before you've gone through the process. And I think probably too often in corporations, people pick the answer before they've actually done the work to get to the answer.
Well, when you left GE, you were on the plastics side of the business, right? And then you come into Apple and as a materials engineer, right? So you're coming into Apple. Tell us a little bit about the products that you're working on and what's your role as a materials engineer in that?
Yeah, I guess I could start at my interview. When I went to Apple, I was interviewing for a supply chain management position at the company.
No.
Yeah, that was the avenue to go from GE to Apple. A lot of great friends had gone in that same thing. And believe it or not, when I joined was 6 months old. And yeah, the iPhone was 6 months old, the first one. I think it was about 6 months. And I remember it was on Golf magazine where there was a broken eye. Somebody had hit the iPhone with a golf ball and it had a shattered screen on it. And it was before glass was on screens, and now it's ubiquitous in the world, but it was early days of that development. And it turns out during the interview,
that thing's never going to work because they put glass on it and people are going to break them. Right. Let's do away with that. That's a bad idea.
That's a bad idea. But yeah, my avenue in was to within. I was always sort of in process development, manufacturing stuff at GE Plastics, but the way into Apple was being a supply chain manager. And during the interview, I just got remarkably fortunate. I still remember everyone who I interviewed with and got to know some amazing people. My great friend Paul, Ron, Evans, and the supply chain people who we just started having a chat about new materials and process development. I still remember to this day, they offered me sort of like two different avenues. And I couldn't believe that engineering was a focus of advancement at a company from that time frame. I was like, that was amazing to hear that like you could be an engineer for a career. And I think at other sort of large corporations, there's a few of them, but being an engineer for your career is not necessarily a glorified position versus being a manager. And you can kind of do both inside of product-based companies, which is an amazing opportunity. And then, I think it was just time and place. When I was at Apple, it was an incredible launch of new products. There was the iPhone, the iPad, MacBook Pro, the mouse that I worked on, the trackpad, like everything, like kind of utilizing glass as a fundamental building block towards products. And I just got remarkably fortunate during that time frame that I was able to work from that. And then also learn I got a great design education from arguably the best design team in the world at that point, where I was able to work with them. And also there was huge amounts of respect for material technology and innovations in that space.
Well, and the rigorous demands around those materials, right? I mean, we certainly, in business literature, we were hearing about Steve Jobs' demands on the design team to make it smaller, make it faster. How do we ensure it doesn't overheat and blow up? And all of the demands we were hearing about as you're moving through production, right? So you're the materials team and you're going, okay, I guess we have to curve the glass around the mouse. I mean, hello, look at mine. I mean, it's still like, I still have the cable on mine because I'm old school. I'm like, I don't want to replace batteries even. And I'm a Mac woman and I still like an old fashioned mouse, but like you're bending glass in ways that we haven't even seen before.
Yeah. And even to this day, I still don't carry a case around on my phone because I spent so many years of my life kind of, in the microns, 50 microns or 100 microns of reduction of thickness. And, what that would do to a customer experience for how much does it weigh and how thick it is. And, it was sort of like a complete, the obsessiveness of products is also what I learned at Apple. I got a very good taste of what it means to sort of approach on an obsession perspective. And sort of that comes with bit of a double-edged sword is that there's never a product I've worked on that you're truly happy with. There's always, if I had a little bit more time or a little bit more money or scope and you would have wanted to improve the product. And you kind of have to find that balance to continue not to get complacent and to continue to push forward to make a difference on the product. And that's what I would say is also a learning it's usually never the best technology that gets onto a product. It's the best technology at the right price and the right time frame at the right scale. There's always a better material, and I get reached out to all the time, which I enjoy because I collect the information. And you want to look at it and say, yep, assess that, but it's not at the right time frame or the right scale, or we have to change something around or do something to be able to introduce that technology.
Okay, I'm so glad you bring this up because there is an endless quest for perfection in innovation. But if there's one thing that we know is that innovation is iterative and we do exist in a particular time and space. And that perfection is an ongoing quest. And I don't think that what you've described is any different for any actor about their material or their maturity when they encounter a role, right? It's never just perfection when they leave it and they watch it 10 years later and like, oh, if only, right? Or if only I had different lighting or a different stage direction, right? I don't think there's one artist or one technologist really who says it was absolute perfection. I wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah. And yeah, how do you find I always call it the curse of a product company, but how do you find the celebration? And it's always that sort of drive to be able to find the celebration, but also push yourself and your team to be able to make a difference in a product. We find that as well, like within Tesla right now and at Apple, you can look backwards and look at like our fingerprints are all over these products that are out in everyday use. And so every Tesla has a giant most glass from the front of the vehicle to the back of the vehicle. And that's a great thing to look back on and have that influence of that sort of fingerprint on the automotive world.
So let's talk a little bit, what I heard you say is on some level, a series of compromises, right? We're talking about glass in the thickness of different microns. We're talking about different materials, knowing that there's some other cutting edge material that may serve us even better, but for budget, but for time, but for testing, we can't use it right now. And so the story that we tell about the product and where it's at in this moment needs to be told. And it needs to be compelling and influential enough that it drives scale. It drives the adoption by the engineering team, manufacturing, production, and even that supply chain, right? That's going to actually ultimately get it to the Apple store. Tell us a little bit about the stories that you use to say, maybe this is what we need to push the envelope, or basta. It's good enough in this moment. Tell us a little bit about those stories and who is your audience for these stories?
Yeah, I think as you look at product development, I always put it around like, what is the constraint? That's a hard constraint. And for instance, at Apple, a hard constraint would be time frame for a launch of a new iPhone. It was pretty much September, October of every single year of launching an iPhone. If that's a rigid constraint, then you look at scope as well as, cost and other aspects, manufacturability and scale, and work backwards from that hard constraint to figure out what is the time frame and down selection we would need to do in order to hit that rigid constraint inside of the thing. So most of the time in corporations, it's cost or time frame. If you're really at a truly sort of technology driven company, scope could be a hard constraint. Then
and how brutal was that September, October timeframe? Did you sleep under your desk?
The most attractive thing was the scale was probably one of the biggest things is you needed. When I was at Apple, we started at the first iPhone, and then the third one, iPhone 4, went to these, what we thought was remarkably huge volumes. Now, in hindsight, look like low volumes, but that was a huge constraint around not only do we have to pick the materials, but we have to have it at global scale. So we have to scale up this manufacturing. And there was a beauty to the supply chain at Apple, that the outsourced supply chain that would scale up factories and equipment in huge volumes very quickly and to the precision that Apple required for the product. So there was a blend of all those details. And I think when you talk storytelling in those timeframes, probably parallel path development was a big learning that I had at that things of how do you start with, like when you tell a story about innovation, you don't want to be caught off guard. So somebody's like, did you consider this technology? So in the background of looking backwards, you would want to, if you have the accountability and authority of new technology development, you want to look at everything and then down select with the right criteria. So plastic versus glass would be scratch resistance. And is it going to survive? And then glass, if you get to glass as an answer to that, then it becomes a thickness or details about how do you down select further with the design team of what constraint made you decide that decision at that time frame. So you don't look backwards and say, I shoulda, woulda, coulda done something previously. And most corporations probably fail in series, or product companies fail in series where they try something, it fails, try something else, it fails, versus inside of the world of the time constraints for a company, like you have to try multiple things at the same time. And I had a great learning there for that obsession around time frame probably drove a lot of the relevant innovation. The nice part about it is you get to launch something. So you get to see it in real life.
You also have the resources and the R&D in the space to actually run these experiments simultaneously.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's a question around, because it's a job as well. So when you look at like innovation, sometimes takes a look at it like maybe too glorified or fuzzy. Like when you look at doing like it's great because you get paid to do an amazing amount of engineering and product development. However, you need to do the rigor to be able to make those decisions and also be like intersect yourself or like infiltrate the product development cycle. I think as companies grow bigger, probably innovation teams can be separated out as islands, and it's kind of nice to be on an island where no one's bothering you. However, and for executives, it's kind of nice. I know what those people do over there. Like they're doing sort of R&D or innovation as a separate from the product roadmap of how are you going to influence the product. Some of the hard work is to make sure you intersect at the right time and tell the story in the right time frame of a product development cycle.
Can you share with us a little bit about what that story looked like? Did you ever have any hard-fought battles, where you were really pushing for a particular either shift or change or integration of some of the innovation that you were working on into it, and a pushback from the engineering team or the scaling team or even the sales team or the manufacturing, your suppliers, your third-party suppliers?
Yeah. I think every day as far as pushback goes. So try to think many stories. There's absolutely kind of I think doing new stuff should be probably met with adversity if you're trying to do something totally different than's been done before.
Wait, say that again.
I think doing new stuff is often and should be met with adversity. With adversity. Yeah. And engineers should expect adversity. So, because you're trying to convince people to do something different that's never been done before. And the most comfortable thing for a corporation is to do what you've done before. So when we at Tesla or at Apple, when you go to build a new phone or a new iPad and you've already done one before, you tend to kind of use the crutch that you've already created or the foundation you've already created. As doing a new material, you would look at an opportunity. We weren't able to put it on that product, so I'm going to wait to this next product development cycle and try to get inside. You want to be in the room to make the decision. You can't be a spectator to the product development life cycles. And I was told this, you don't see it at the time, but I was told I went by a mentor at a time that you should expect adversity because you're doing things that people aren't used to. And how do you influence? Probably my biggest challenge right now is to influence get the right champions of your technology and try to explain the sort of thought process behind it in preparation for when you go to introduce it. So you just don't, sometimes you can be known as an innovator to come with either a crazy idea or an expensive material that sort of causes disruption within a supply chain team. And by far, I am known as and I take it proudly because, my job is to continue to fight for the product. And if it's a material solves a problem, I want to be in that room with a voice and with rigorous data as well. It's not just a loud voice like, hey, let's do some fancy stuff. You got to come with data. This is a competitive environment inside corporations. So you want to have a really good set of data, really good slides, and put it up there to show what are the primary things this thing solves.
I just heard you say so many lessons for other innovators, in not just in your space, but in general. So I keep hearing Hamilton in my head, which is number one, you have to be in the room where it happens, right?
That's right. Yeah.
In the room where it happens. Yes. Yeah. So we'll include that link at the bottom of the show notes in the event that you need a Hamilton break. But part of that being in the room is also being the person with great ideas that you get invited to the rooms where it happens, right? So number one is thinking about, is my innovation off on an island somewhere, or am I choosing the right times to connect with the scaling team so that my awesome ideas, the innovation doesn't actually get lost and we don't fall into the complacency of doing things the same way every time, right? That's what I heard you say, number one. Yeah. And the other thing I heard you say is, I wear it with a kind of badge of pride that I'm going to be the one pushing the envelope. I'm going to be this one disrupting the thought process around this, even if it costs more, takes more time, etc., because the desire for product awesomeness is not something you're ever going to leave behind. And the third thing I heard you say, and I wonder it to myself, is, does someone who works in innovation then have to be by nature someone who's not just afraid of change, but also willing to fight really in a competitive corporate space, that you're willing to amass the data tell the story. And I often tell my clients, what if stories are just data with a soul? Meaning that we're not just spitting numbers at people. We're actually able to take the data, and that's not mine. That's Brene Brown who said that. What if stories are just data with a soul? And we're actually able to make the connection between why I'm disrupting this, why I'm in this room, why I'm bringing you this data. And now let me tell you what the soul of the product really feels like and looks like.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot there. I think absolutely, I love that data with a soul. And I think in addition to that, is just to expand on it, would be to simplify down a technical information into an understandable format. Like I think when I started my career at GE, Nancy Martin, never forget it. She sat me down and she was a mentor, and she was the senior vice president of the research and development center at GE. And she mentioned, like, when you sit in front of an executive, as an executive, I think, what does this person want from me? Do they want money? Do they want time? And you spend 10 minutes of the conversation with them trying to, in their mind, going, I have no idea why this person's talking to me and things. And because people want executive exposure. So whenever it's from that day on, whenever I've met with CEOs, or even, the CEOs that are in other businesses that I'm working on with, I'll mention to them, I'm going to ask you for this amount of money, and I'm going to show you this data, and then I'm going to circle back to it at the end and see things, but a very simplified version of things. So they get it, like in their mind, they're like, okay, this person's going to ask me, like they're in decision mode making, or if it's an update, we had this problem and we have a technical update. So they would understand the context before you start giving the story. And I also related to sort of stand-up comedy where Chris Rock mentioned, like, my joke's always going to work if I set up the premise correctly. Like, if I get people in the right mindset, my joke's always going to work. And I'll always remember that, just because I was like, yeah, that's what people like, get them in the right mindset of like, why are you going to make the decision and then move forward?
You're pushing all my buttons as an amateur stand-up.
Oh, great. I would be terrified of that. I'm not funny, nor am I. It's like very terrifying.
It is the most terrifying thing on the planet. It is so much scarier than any roller coaster you will ever be on, because the only way to make the ride stop is either to make people laugh or get the hell off the stage. That's terrifying. So yeah, the setup is so important. But, and what we talk about on the show often is innovation storytelling is about getting the resources, the runway, and the recognition that you deserve. Mm-hmm. It's not recognition as a pat on the back, like, oh, I'm doing awesome. It's to move the innovation forward, recognize that this product and what we're doing here matters.
Yeah.
And so that executive interaction starts with the question, do I need resources? Do I need runway, or do I need recognition?
Yeah.
Or do I need to scrap this whole thing and please help me do that graciously?
Yeah. And I think the best, in my opinion, the best thing an executive could ask you is, what else do you need, or what do you need to do this? And as soon as people hear that, you should also be ready for that question. There's a preparation to get in front of an exec. That's not just lip service or executive exposure that you need to take seriously, that you create sort of a simplified version, but also, like, executives get paid to make decisions. That's just a fundamental, like, rule of law within corporations. Our job as engineers or as whoever else is in a company is to present the right level of information to drive that decision. And you can steer it. There's no question about it. Like, you can manipulate and steer the decision, but you can have an opinion, but you want to have the right level of data. I think in storytelling with engineering, you want to give options. Like, the worst thing I think you do is show up an executive and have one option, because it automatically sets up a tone of like, what else is not being, what are the other trade-offs that you're going to do? So the other part of the storytelling is to show up with any pitch that we'll do on a daily basis, is to show up with 3 or 4 options. Here's what we looked at. Here's the trade-offs. This is our recommended one, but we also have 2 or 3 others that are workable, but we have to do, like, either you can decontent it, move a specification, pay a little bit more money, take a little bit more time. But what are those trade-offs for it to be able to present those in a very clear, understandable way?
Right. And the consequences of those decisions.
Absolutely.
That the executive needs to make now.
Yeah. And I think that's the consequences are kind of innovation or development world. You're kind of predicting problems. So the consequences are sometimes reactionary consequences are very easy. We have an issue in the field. We got to solve it. The production manufacturing is down. Everyone has to deploy in and help out with production. Predictive problems are trickier. You have to instill a level of fear of what if I don't make that decision? So if I'm putting myself in the executive's she or he's shoes, you're saying, well, if I don't make this decision, I'm going to have to deal with it. So trying to drive, that's one of the tricks of the trade. Instill enough fear inside of a executive so they make the decision and make it a hard decision for them to make.
That's why they get paid the big bucks to make these decisions, right?
Yeah, and that's what I use that constantly because it's what they get paid to do. So that's what executives get. In fundamental, they have a lot more than that. They get to drive the business and culture, but my job is to present data to them, and their job is to make the decision. So you can have an opinion, but if you're accountable, like I always draw an accountability and authority 4-block matrix that I want to be accountable, but I also want the authority to be in the room to do that. And you find too often that, people are like, they either don't have the authority to make the decision, but they want to be accountable. It ends up hurting them because they don't have the authority to make the decision or they're not in the room, but they're accountable for the performance of
for the outcome. Right.
For the outcome. Yeah. So, at Tesla and at Apple, I was the glass person. So if it involves glass, I want to be in the room. Like I want to be in the discussion because you want to be accountable, but you also want the authority to make the decision or present in data. Yeah. And I also relate a lot of things to sports, and it is a competitive environment. It should be. I didn't learn that going to school or showing up in things. I learned it from playing team sports. Like this is a competitive environment. You want to show up. You want to be polished. You need to figure out what the skills are and who to engage and how to win, if you will. Winning for me would be to put the best material on our vehicles and really support the product. I wouldn't say losses. These are great products, but it's also, if you look back, like you get obsessed. If I go and look at a Tesla, I'll be looking at the distortion in a windshield that's at an angle that no one else can see, but I'll be like, oh, it's not good enough. Or like you'll constantly be like refreshing that. And I remember like at Apple, the design team used to go and buy products that were commercial and assess them. And we do it at Tesla as well. It's just make sure the quality is to our level of expectation.
Actually going and getting a car and seeing it up close, or?
Yeah. Going to get a car, seeing it up close, responding to field issues. Great to have vocal customers so they can drive. I think that's also like a huge part of our product development. You get to listen to what are the field issues, listen to what people are complaining about. And that drives sort of product development for things, or our scope for innovation inside of Tesla. And I think that's where also like we're solving problems that make a difference at the product. So our scope of, say, glass innovation, it's not just wide open. You can go work on whatever you want to do. It's also like, here's a thing that we're going to go try to solve.
Do you use that kind of Clay Christensen approach where you say, okay, what problem is this windshield, this window, this rearview mirror, this what have you, solving for me today, for my customer today? Is that the question that you ask yourself?
In the future, what's going to be used like more often? What is the predictive problem as far as like, there's a whole group that focuses on sort of like field issues or quality issues, that's improvements or updates. My team tends to look into the future and saying like, okay, what are the challenges to scale of Tesla? What are the challenges that we're going to see in the glass world? And how do we solve those moving forward, like things? And what do we have to do today to solve them in the future, or to build up a toolbox or change the design team's thinking towards a problem? My scope is mostly in the future, predicting, hey, if we did this, or retraining the design team to not be institutionalized. Like, here's a new toolbox. Here's another tool you have in your toolbox to design great products. And how do you do that? But I would say that probably the main difference is also, I tend to throw out sort of ambiguous statements to my team. And then
what's an example of that?
Example is like kind of solve impact resistance for glass is an example where you don't come with the answer. It's just, here's what we're thinking about doing, and or durability of glass. And there's a lot of people who sort of need a bit of structure within the scope and can't sort of like the self-motivation learning aspect is something that you definitely need to interview for. It's not that people aren't learners. It's more the being comfortable in ambiguity is a skill that a lot of innovators need to have. Like there's no right or wrong. It's a question around, and no one's going to tell you this is what to do because you're doing something different.
That's never been done in theory.
That's never been done. Yeah. And you'll find adversity from traditional, like what I would call a traditional engineer she or he needs it sort of like scoped out. They're doing a mechanical design and they need to own that whole world, or a supply chain person that has their costs all worked out. And then somebody comes in with a crazy idea like that. Quality engineers, those things are really important to corporations. And just like I couldn't do their job, they couldn't be comfortable in ambiguity. So trying to find that, I've been shocked. I find people who think in general, people love the idea of ambiguity, but when they get into it and they need to be self-motivated and measured on their performance dealing with ambiguity, it's a different skill set. And sort of knowing what you're comfortable in is a really good, very good self-awareness thing that I think people need to get.
It's fascinating because I think from the outside, so many people see innovation as linear. And the reality is that innovation is really kind of a directed chaos, right? And we're moving through it. We have an objective, but you're at the forefront and you're in a place like Tesla whereby the contemplation around driving may not even involve a driver. Mm-hmm. And therefore, that windshield may no longer be just a simple pane of pure glass, right? It now may involve problem solving around what else can my window do for me? What else can my windshield do for me that I never contemplated before, because staring at the road isn't my central purpose any longer. So what could this beautiful hunk of glass now do for me that it never could before? Right. And it's not a problem that I'm solving. It's a huge new field of opportunity, right?
Yeah. And to give you kind of, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's that future is quite amazing. And it's also what, like, if you go to, whether it's the different shows that show sort of what the future of mobility is, and you could obviously see it, and it's an amazing thing. What we consider innovation inside Tesla, we spend almost all of our time on scale and human factors like the thermal performance, the acoustic performance, the impact resistance, and things that enable us to do it at a large scale. So not that you could do one, but how are you going to launch it? I think that's where it's sort of it's a good analogy of when you take it sort of on its own. And of course, that would be an area that we'd like Tesla to be interested in. But what I consider sort of relevant development is also doing things like large scale glass production and different types of thermal performance and acoustical performance to change the comfort in a vehicle, and also do it at the right price, at the right scale. And there's layered in that is not sort of like leapfrog innovation, but it's sort of, we started with a foundation and then you're looking at how do you improve this moving forward and make an impact so you can point to it in the world and say, I did that. Now, there's other engineers that are driven by sort of like the technology development that we're talking about here, is if your displays or integration into functionality. And for me personally, we spent some time on that, but also like building up a foundation that's scalable. Always in my mind is a focus on mass production of like, how is this going to affect mass production? And how do you intersect a product development cycle in the right time at the right tact to be able to make that difference? And that's sort of an interesting, it's not necessarily a show car or a show of technology. You're in the mix of a product development world. So if I drove my team to go work on the integration of technology, we would be that team over in the silo working on cool interconnected stuff, which is great, but we wouldn't be in the mix and really focusing on making a difference to the product today and the product life cycles of how are you in the room on the current product development.
So are you that bridge then, Mike? Are you like, there's the team over here in the bubble that's going, wow, like, let's make this a drive-in movie theater, right?
Yeah.
This windshield versus, let's see if we can actually get this thing to scale and into the hands of a consumer. And you're the bridge between those two folk?
We're kind of, we'll sort of circle, like what I usually do is every sort of 6 to 8 months, I'll circle into those bubbles that exist not only at Tesla, but in our supply chain and in things. So circle around there just to see kind of where the advancements in technology and what are the trade-offs of cost and haziness and regulations and all that world. But in addition to being in sort of the scope, and we'll take some of those, the time frame or tack that I'll talk about is in early stages of product development. It's blue sky, any ideas open. So things like that will come into sort of like early product development stages. Then as tools are being kicked off and you're going to produce a vehicle, like your ability to influence that product with technology starts to become less and less based on risk and global scale. So if you approach a product that's like halfway through, manufacturing's already kicked off, the production is tooling's already kicked off and you're going into production mode. And then you're like, oh, wait, we should do this cool technology. You're going to be that person that comes in and just, throws crazy ideas inside of now those crazy ideas are great, but preserve them for when you're early on in product development. And same in the production aspect. If you go into a production environment, you need to be hierarchical in that environment. You need to behave in a very hierarchical structure. You can't go and leapfrog decision makers and things when you're in production. In design mode, you can absolutely do that. You can go and talk to anybody and do things. But I think the approach of how professionals need to behave within product companies needs to be different depending on where in the product lifecycle you are.
Okay, so let's talk about some crazy ideas because you've brought some props with you today.
Yes.
And for those of you who don't know, right, you may have seen Elon Musk step out on a stage and unveil the Tesla Cybertruck, right, which was this huge press event, massive global event. And in the unveiling, there was a desire to showcase the incredible glass in the windows. And something really exceptional happened in the midst of that showcase event. Mike, will you share with us what happened on that stage that day? This was back in November 2019, if I remember correctly, right? So tell us what happened with the Cybertruck exactly, Mike.
Yeah, it was a night I'll never forget. Absolutely. And even during that night, I've failure as far as in the glass world and any glass scientists and engineers are out there is what 30 million people all live and in person saw during that event was a glass failure that we do every single day of our lives. Now, we did that in front of 30 million people live and in person, and the internet took over. Yeah, that night, even before you knew it would go viral, I picked up the ball and and snapped off a piece of the broken glass after we fixed it.
Wait. So we have to go back. Some of our listeners won't know. So let me go back a little bit.
Oh, what happened? Yeah. For those who haven't seen it, which I imagine
which will be included.
There was durable glass has been a thesis my team has been working on for at least 3 years now, since the semi-truck launch about 3 years ago. And we're in the lead. We're at by far the forefront of durable glass in the world. So we wanted to test that out live and in person in front of, as far as a live demo goes. And anybody in things knows live. And glass is a probability of failure thing. So you never know. Even so, our leadership has talked about it. But they took this ball, which I grabbed on that thing. So
and what is that made out of?
Steel. Yeah, it's a 1 kilogram steel ball.
Steel snowball. Yeah.
Yeah. And they pitched it at pitched it at the front window of the Cybertruck. And previous to that, we had done a demo, which went good. And the window smashed. And I went through every emotion you could imagine, going through to the sunken feeling to a terrified version of what's going to happen next to fix it mode with my team to replace the window so people could go on drives. And, it's a good reason. I also snapped off a piece of the broken glass that night, because I mentioned to myself, I'm never going to forget this one. So in the moment, like in my objective wheel, I said, I'll remember this forever, but I also am going to tell this story eventually. So thanks for the opportunity that I can coach failure, but also when you're in it, it's a different mode. You have to be an environment, because I'm still a test. It has to be a safe environment where you're able to fail and then move forward to things. And failure is an incredible part of product development. And it also is a great testament, I think, that it's pushing the envelope. You're finding that the cliff of failure, and you're trying to figure out how to navigate product performance to attributes. And that was it's the most famous glass failure in the history of the world by a large margin.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. So, and people who have broken iPhones somewhat responsible for those as well. So I think glass breakage is
little less dramatic, but
met the person. But it was, when you look at it, it's this safe environment. It's also, we kind of, in running a marathon related to being in first place, you trip, you fall, you get up, dust yourself off and continue to move forward.
Wait. So back up for a second. So here's Elon Musk on stage, right?
Yeah.
This first steel snowball goes out and cracks, and Elon looks over and goes, "What happened?" He goes, "Try it again." Right? Because it wasn't enough that one window broke. Let's do it one more time just to make sure.
That's right.
So I'm sure all of my listeners want to know, what is the conversation that happens between you and Elon following this catastrophic glass failure?
Yeah, there's a lot of get it done directly after it.
Get it
but
done?
Also,
meaning fix it?
No, we had to, just because we were halfway through the presentation. They had to do drive, so my team jumped on it to get it fixed and replaced as the first thing to go. But also we had some, like, it was a good teachable moment for me, especially with Elon, not sharing with specifics, but like I'm still at Tesla and we shared sort of like,
I still have a job.
Yeah. And it's a testament, I think, to the fact that like to do failure, you have to have a safe environment to fail. Believe me, I think everybody, including my family and friends, were like, because the initial reaction is you get fired, right? That's like the initial reaction to that discussion in a real format. And believe me, I went through all those emotions. But when you look at it, it's like it's in the right intention. It's still part of, some of the most durable glass ever put on a vehicle.
Yeah.
And you just got to keep working the problem. But yeah, that's the organizational safety to be able to do that and talk about it is remarkably important.
So do you know what the failure was? Do you know what went wrong?
There was a whole ton of different aspects that could have happened in that things. I think that's where it's interesting. Of course, we're going to solve it, but it's also making sure we solve the problem in the right product development format.
Framework.
The problem is durability is a question around a whole bunch of different attributes of durability and also cost and weight and things of going through exactly what it means to be the best glass onto the vehicle. And yeah, well, definitely my team's working on it absolutely to solve it. And then when you go into production, it sort of refines it. There's a whole list of things, but we don't necessarily look backwards. It happened. Take a look at it. You do like what's kind of like I learned from I have some really good friends who were in the special forces in the military who do an after action report, and not just an amazing event, like an incredible one, like the glass breakage, but after every training thing or things. And it's one of those things that I've instituted since to get everybody around, said what went good, what went bad, what could have gone better. And get opinions from everybody around it. And that's helpful in those situations, but also you get a gut feeling of like, oh, that hurts. What's amazing about it is that part of my story of, doing innovation and continue to move forward, which I'm proud of my team. I'm proud of things you got to sort of adapt to it. Of like, hey, how do we push through this? What happened? And I think that the idea of failure is a negative thing from the outside looking in and things, but not to say that doesn't happen, but you don't know until you try, and then you try and it fails. Then it's like, okay, what do we do after that? And that's an interesting one.
And I mean, to be in a culture, we've watched some of Elon Musk's biggest failures, right? But we also have so much hope and optimism every time we see another SpaceX go up and come down, sometimes in flames, right? I mean, we're
amazing.
Still so optimistic about what's coming next. And I think we were also talking about a conversation you had with one of my clients and one of your suppliers, Corning, right? And you get a call from Corning that's going, hey, about that glass.
I think everybody in the entire glass industry got exactly that same call. Was that our glass? After the day after, glass was on the front page of everybody's
radar. I was at Corning that next day, and it was all the talk of the town.
And I would also say, like, there tends to be like people would call you and just be like, hey, how you doing? But it's also, you get to know, like, Wendell, who's the CEO of Corning, gave me a call the day after and said, hey, I just wanted to, I want to see if you're all right. And, the other is like, wow, we put that's glasses on the front page of everybody's map right now. It's fortunate to have that, to be in a position where you're able to get calls from great people at Corning and Wendell himself to say, hey, like, hey, thanks. But I got a lot of calls like, hey, was that our glass? Just making sure things.
It's pretty awesome, though, to be like, we know a little thing about 169 years of breaking glass over here.
Yeah,
we're familiar.
Right.
We got you. We've seen this before.
Right.
This has just been an incredible experience and such an opportunity to talk with you and to share your expertise coming from places like GE and Apple and Tesla. And I know for all of our community at Innovation Storytellers, we just wish you the best and onward and upward to great glass that stays intact as you wish it to be.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was really a pleasure, Susan, to talk with you. Thanks so much for your time.
Oh, it's awesome. Alrighty. So if people want to get in touch with you, what is the best way to connect with you, Mike?
Yeah, best way to connect is on LinkedIn. Mike Pilliod. My last name is Pilliod. Just reach out on LinkedIn. Any ideas, or just to chat, absolutely. I'm available.
Fantastic. You will find the links to Hamilton, be in the room where it happens.
Great.
We will also share the link to that fantastic video in the show notes as well. And thank you so much for listening to Innovation Storytellers.
Now you might be asking, Susan, why innovation storytelling? Well, the truth is that An innovation story told well not only breaks down communication barriers so you can drive change and new growth, but it also helps other people remember and champion your work. And it propels your best ideas forward faster to secure you the runway, resources, and recognition you so richly deserve. In other words, stories are memory-making devices that significantly reduce the time it takes for you and your innovation to be understood. But like many leaders, you probably never got the memo that storytelling skills would be central to your success. Well, I've got some good news for you. It's not too late because I've got you covered. Whether you need an expert to come and speak to your innovation leaders, you need training in the art and method of innovation storytelling, or you just need the support and guidance of a consultant who can get you where you want to go in less time, visit www.susanlindner.com today to learn more and to set up a call to discuss your needs. I'm so looking forward to connecting with you and to helping you tell a great innovation story. If you liked what you heard so far, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another episode. And leave us a comment. Tell us what you think of this episode. We'd love to hear from you. And if you didn't like what you've heard, just forget everything I've said.